Hello and welcome back to another episode of The Future is Human. I'm very excited to be joined today by Conor McGlynn. Conor is someone that I have never met before. I just met him for the first time when I hopped on this recording with him. But I emailed him a couple of weeks ago because I read a fascinating and very well-researched article in Compact Mag written by him called AI and the Myth of the Machine. I read this work. I included it in the last newsletter, actually, so you may have read it as well. And then I reached out to Conor and said, I would love to have you on the podcast to talk about this. So with that introduction, Conor, welcome to The Future is Human.
Thanks, Zach. Really happy to be here.
Absolutely. Now, I'd love for people to learn a little bit more about who you are and your background. I noticed that you were studying for your doctorate at Harvard. I think that was in the byline at Compact, and your email address has Harvard in it. So I assume you are indeed a student at Harvard University, but tell me more about where you've been and what you're doing there now.
Yeah, sure. So, quick background on myself. I'm originally from Ireland. Worked for a while after graduating from my degree in philosophy originally in policy. So, I worked in policy in Europe and then in Washington, D.C. for a little while. And I came to Harvard about 4 years ago to start this PhD where I kind of study public policy from a more philosophical perspective. So I'm interested in questions about what gets to be seen as a policy problem, how policy debates are framed, and what assumptions and narratives guide policymaking. I'm currently based at Harvard's program on science, technology, and society, which addresses these kind of questions. And my dissertation focuses on this in the context of AI policy in particular. I'm interested in understanding the kind of tacit narratives around AI, the ideologies that lie behind the development of this technology. And in particular, my dissertation looks at this idea of existential risk from AI, looks at where this idea came from and how it kind of shapes AI policymaking today.
Uh,
Uh,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was just going to say that this is what brought me to thinkers like Lewis Mumford and others who similarly look at questions about the kind of the tacit assumptions, narratives that shape our attitudes towards technology.
Perfect segue. Yeah. So your article was about Lewis Mumford, who I assume is not at all related to Marcus Mumford of the Mumford and Sons. Um, but who was Lewis Mumford, and why does he matter? When I was reading your work, he was reminding me a lot of Marshall McLuhan, who I assume is someone else, another theorist that you've read a lot of in your program and in your research. But who is Lewis Mumford? Why should we care about what he has to say?
Sure, yeah, I also wondered about that Mumford and Sons connection, but I haven't
Yeah.
discovered one yet. So Mumford was a kind of a very prominent 20th century theorist of technology and society. He was quite an interesting character just for the breadth of the things that he covered. So he was a great urbanist and art critic. He was actually the architecture critic for the New Yorker magazine, and I think is still quite influential in the fields of planning and urban design today.
Wow.
The way I've encountered him is primarily as a theorist of technology and society. So I think he was really novel in the ways he thought about the consequences of living in a society that's increasingly mediated by different kinds of technology. And in terms of why I think his work matters today, I think he provides a counterpoint to this sort of pervasive techno-optimism that tends to suffuse discussions about technology. He lived through the technological revolutions of the early 20th century. I think he was born at about 1895. So he really saw America become a wealthy technological society across his life. And I think most of the people around him, most of the people then and even now, kind of see this connection between social progress and technological process as kind of inherent or essential. Um, Whereas Mumford showed that something gets lost in this process as well, even as technology extends our lives and gives us new capabilities. It also has this, or can have this kind of dehumanizing effect, which is often underappreciated or not fully reckoned with.
Yeah, you mentioned techno-optimism in there, and Lewis being a strong counterpoint, or the work of Lewis Mumford being a strong counterpoint to this techno-optimism. How would you define techno-optimism? Is that just the idea that as technology advances, life gets better and better?
Yeah, I think it's this default assumption that the development and adoption of new technologies is a good thing in itself. Now, clearly, a lot of technological development would say is a good thing. Like you can think of penicillin, refrigerators, like all of these things that we've built and that have allowed us to live longer, happier, more comfortable lives. Clearly, however, also much technological development has led to pretty bad outcomes for humanity. Some very obvious examples from the 20th century include the mechanization that was put to quite horrific ends during the Holocaust, the development of nuclear weapons, development of various other kinds of weapons that I think have clearly increased human suffering and not made our lives better. And I think the what I would see as a defining feature of techno-optimism is that in spite of this mixed history of technological development, in spite of the fact we can look back and narrate both a good history and a bad history of technology, we still take technology itself to be a good thing. Like, and technological development is something that we should aim for as an end in itself. Instead of thinking about whether, do new technologies improve our lives? Do they serve human values? Do they allow us to lead better lives, more flourishing lives? We instead embrace new technology just by default. And I kind of in the piece described this as a kind of secular faith that, regardless of any negative effects technology might have today or might have had in the past, there is still this faith that technology is leading us to a better world, will lead us to a better world.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was having a conversation with family over the weekend, extended family, and I posed the question because I've just finished reading. He's not an Irishman, but he's living in your native home of Ireland. Paul Kingsnorth, his book Against the
Yes,
Machine. Have you read this book yet?
I haven't read it, but I'm a big fan of Paul Kingsnorth. I think he's
Yeah,
like
I mean,
really
yeah,
is.
you've probably read a lot of his Substack like I have, and I think, in fact, many of the chapters in his book are basically refined versions of some of his earlier missives on Substack. So I'm sure, very familiar with the arguments that he makes in the book. But he raises the question about, even the car. Was the car worth it? Has the car been a destructive force? And to the American mind, when you pose that question, I think people immediately will say, well, no, of course not. The car lets me get where I'm going so much faster. It saves me so much time, et cetera. We, of course, would be way worse off without cars, and if we just had to rely on horses and buggies. But when you scratch the surface a little bit, you do start to wonder, well, if we didn't have the car, we wouldn't have the suburbs. We'd have cities that were more organic. We wouldn't have the mega corporation because it makes logistics much more difficult and almost impossible to execute at scale in the way that Amazon has done that, or Walmart. So you have the proliferation of small businesses, and you have better wealth distribution, et cetera. It's harder for oligarchs to develop access to the capital that they have. And that's just the car. I think it's difficult. You mentioned vaccines and refrigerators, for example, and I definitely agree. You can look at medical advances and say that's a good thing. We are saving lives that otherwise we're saving lives of people who would otherwise have died were it not for the invention of this vaccine or of this chemotherapy method or of this CAR T cell treatment, et cetera. But the medical domain, I think, is really the only domain where you can say, like, unqualifiedly, this is better. I mean, I think about society. Would society be better off if we had never invented the smartphone? I think yes. I think so. Would society be better off if we had never invented the internet? I also think yes. And maybe that makes me a Luddite for saying that. I don't think so. I think it just, it allows me to recognize there are costs to this stuff.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that when you come to the digital technologies, that this really, really becomes quite clear. I mean, you think of, you mentioned the internet. I mean, like, just think of social media. I mean, we have so much evidence that it increases loneliness, increases things like teen self-harm. It atomizes us, polarizes us. And also, like, if I talk to people around me, I don't think I've met anyone who's like, oh yeah, social media has made my life better in some
Right.
significant way.
Right.
I think the other example of this I love is like short videos on TikTok or YouTube, which I know an awful lot of people who watch them. I don't know anyone who thinks that the invention of this has made their life better. I think they, like people say, it hurts their attention span, and they just think it's like an addiction. They can't stop
Yeah.
watching it. And then when we come to AI today, again, like, I think it's eroding our ability to think for ourselves. This idea of like cognitive offloading, that we sort of lose the ability to do the things that we delegate to the machine. Impact on children, I think, is, I guess, something we really have not reckoned with. And like, despite all this evidence that our current technological preoccupations are not leading to a better world, that they're eroding important parts of our humanity, we still kind of just accept them into our lives, into our children's lives. And this question of whether they're improving or degrading us, it doesn't even arise as a question in deciding whether or not to adopt them. And this is why I think, like, the idea of a secular faith uh, is sort of apt, because it's divorced from anything about how we are seeing these technologies appear in our own life. It's just, well, it's technology, it's good, it will yeah, deliver a better future. And just to pick up on one thing that you mentioned there about this like, kind of like Luddite point, I mean, maybe pushing the faith idea further is like there is a sort of heresy today in making the kind of argument that you just made that this is, you know, you get branded a Luddite for pointing out these obvious facts about, you know, the technology not having made our lives better. And even I do a lot of work with these AI safety organizations, which you know, are very concerned about things like existential risk and these extreme outcomes from technology. But even they like don't come out and just say this technology is bad. The constant refrain is we need to realize the benefits while mitigating the risks, which assumes that there are these like wonderful benefits, this bountiful future that the technology will bring, um, and that the question is just like clearing the way to get there.
And this is now getting into the territory where you really dove deep in your article because you talked about how Mumford basically describes this blind belief that technology will get us to the promised land as akin to a religious faith.
Mm,
And this opens up a ton of questions that I have. I think one of those is, do you have to have a religious faith, an alternative religious faith, to push back against this idea effectively? Another is, is it necessarily the case that the advocates of this sort of technological optimism will eventually pursue this with a religious zeal? Or
mm,
does this open up the possibility that there is a sort of like fundamental zealotry among the techno optimists, such that when you or me say a Luddite type thing, like, are we better off because of the internet? We, in some future world, could actually be marked for deletion, you know, like targeted by these sort of quasi-religious zealots in this way. A third one would be, has the collapse of traditional theistic religion actually opened up a vacuum where this sort of secular religion of technological progress has filled, you know? So maybe you can tackle one or all of those, but maybe we could start with the first one.
yeah. Yeah. So the question of whether religious faith is the as an antidote or can be an antidote to this sort of like pervasive optimism. I think I think about this on maybe like three different levels. So one
Hmm.
is the individual level, one is the community level, and then one is the societal level. At the individual level, yes, I think like there's a number of things. I mean, part of what we can do is just, you know, recognize that our lives are not being made better by these technologies and kind of reject on an individual level the this sort of false promise that we're being offered by these companies. You know, get out of the ways of talking about these things as being like inevitable or like that there's no alternative.
Hmm.
Um, However, I mean, you have children. I think I've talked to a lot of parents who just say it's incredibly difficult working by yourself to stop, you know, these things getting into your home. Like you just, you know, social media is. I think parents find it very, very difficult to take that, you know, to like take this burden onto themselves to try
Right.
and hold back the flood of this like technological society.
And hold back a flood is a good analogy there,
Mm,
because it seems like every single force in society is arrayed against you. You send your kids to school and they're going to be issued iPads, you know, and you're like, what do they need that to, you know, why do they need iPads to learn how to do a Cartesian coordinate system? I did it just fine on notebook paper, you know?
mm. Yeah, and this is why I mean I think one of the places where I do have a little bit more hope maybe it'd be like looking at it at the community level, and I think there are like some interesting examples, like particularly I think like some faith communities. So I think one of the examples I love to give is the Amish community, and
Hmm.
I mean the Amish are often kind of like treated as the butt of a joke of like you know these like the ultimate Luddites, these like
Right.
anti-technological people. But I mean, in fact, they're not. Like different Amish groups take up different technologies. I mean, even if it is just the horse and buggy, like they are not kind of against technology as a thing. What does characterize the Amish is that they treat the adoption of a new technology as a matter of collective decision making. So within their communities, they say, does this technology allow us to live better lives? Does it allow us to live, you know, lives
Interesting.
closer to God?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then they just, you know, they don't accept it. And I think when you put it like that, I mean, like that's the kind of society I'd like to live in. I'd like to live in a society where we treat these technologies not as something that we must adopt, but as something, well, does this improve our lives? And the other community, I recently spent some time in London, and I was living in Stamford Hill, which is I think it's the largest Orthodox Jewish community in Europe. And I was just struck by the no one in the community had a smartphone, as far as I could
Oh
tell.
well.
People had like the dumb phones, or like kind of like old Nokia style phones, but I didn't see a single smartphone.
Wow.
And no, here's like this technology that we're told is impossible to live in the modern life without a smartphone. And yet here's a community that's living in, a in London, like a large Western capital city, and they're living just fine without it. Now, I mean, obviously the kind of Orthodox Jewish communities and the Amish are sort of maybe extreme examples of particularly insular communities, but I think it does raise the question of what we can learn from these
Hmm.
groups. And it kind of like it shows the lie in this idea that we need to just accept these things as inevitable, and no, like here are living breathing communities that are doing without them.
I mean,
uh,
I think most people who would be listening to you right now would say that sounds like a great future, one in which the terms of my own digital existence are not dictated by Amazon and Google and ChatGPT, OpenAI and Anthropic, but rather are dictated by the terms of my community. And my community gets together and says, do we want this thing? Will this thing help us be stronger families? Will it help our children develop better? Will it help our marriages? Will it help our friendships? And I think, like you said, you were talking about doom scrolling on these like TikTok
mm,
videos and YouTube Shorts. People recognize this is actually does not make me better. And I think if you offer people a path out, I think most people would take it. I mean, we have where I live here in northern Indiana, there are data centers coming in. I think we have 3,000 data centers coming up across the U.S. now, all to support this AI boom. And no one here wants them. Literally, no
mm,
one here wants them. And if you resist, though, you're called a luddite or you're called anti-jobs because somehow these data centers are going to magically create jobs. Um, and not to mention that they're not going to be the types of jobs that actually give people dignity, and they're not going to be dignity, work of dignity. It's just going to be
mm,
sort of managing the server farm. But yeah, you're branded that way. I mean, I was getting my haircut yesterday, and my barber, not a college degree, not making six figures, and I was talking with her about these data centers and AI and technology in schools, and she was like, "Yeah, no, I don't want this. I don't want this for my kids. Nobody wants this. Nobody asked me."
mm.
And I think that's the rub right there. Nobody asked me. It feels like there's very much an outside in, top down dictation of how our life will be lived. You will
Mm.
adapt or you will become obsolete, and nobody wants to be obsolete, right?
Yeah, and I think I mean, it points to, I mean, what is driving the adoption of these technologies, I think, in a lot of cases, is fear. It's fear of being left behind. It's not that people are, genuinely enthusiastic about them. And I think I mentioned that I'm sort of that these community, like I'm sort of optimistic at the community level that people can band together and maybe define terms for themselves and their communities. At a societal level, I think it's much more difficult for the kind of reasons that you um, indicated there. Like even though you have people who maybe share a sentiment that this isn't the kind of community they want, they don't want a data center in their backyard, that it's very difficult to like think of where the political will for resisting this on a sort of like societal level might come
Right.
from. I mean, one thing, I mean, you mentioned the idea of like meaningful work. Like I think maybe, you know, labor movement unions is one place where people say like, it's I mean, people I think like don't want to be idle. Like people want to be doing meaningful work. They don't. I mean, I've been talking to some of my students here who are doing even like software engineering, and they don't want to spend their lives, telling an AI to do the coding for them. They came in to do this because they want to do the work themselves. And if people see themselves, this source of meaning in their lives being erased by this technology, and obviously just the economic self-interest of, if you're losing your job to this thing, potentially that could form a kind of like societal basis of resistance.
Yeah.
And then the other, I think, societal level thing, again, going back to the question about faith communities, is that I think, I mean, in America in particular, you do have large faith communities who, like, you could imagine being galvanized around these issues at a much wider scale. I mean, if people come to see this as, I mean, as kind of in the I mean, the title of this podcast, "The Future is Human." Like, I think it's a recognition of the real threat from these things, that the future might not be human, that the future might be,
Right.
deeply alien and inhuman in ways which are, I would say, like anathema to almost every faith tradition that I'm familiar with. Um, yeah, so yeah, at a societal level, it's really not clear to me how or where that kind of resistance might come from. But those are kind of the two spaces where.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think it does, I guess, give me some hope that even in a world that has had declining religious faith, and inarguably the West has that. I mean, there's some data on the resurgence, and my last podcast guest was talking about the resurgence of religious faith in Europe, but it remains to be seen whether or not that's a flash in the pan or something that will endure. And even if it will endure, it's still small relative to the culture. So even absent a resurgence in religious faith, maybe there is something. My conversation with my barber yesterday was not, her objection to AI was not because it was not some deep-seated religious objection. It was because she recognizes this is not making a better future for her, and she actually didn't have children. It was her nieces and nephews she was talking about, but she recognized that. And so I think you don't have to be a Christian or an Orthodox Jew or a Muslim to recognize that. I think most of us know it. If we're pressed deep down, I think we look at it and we look at we think about our own childhood. You look a little bit younger than me, but like I grew up in the 90s, and growing up in the 90s was an amazing childhood. And I think it was probably the best childhood before childhoods got worse, because childhoods got more digital after that. But I grew up totally outside. My mom, towards the end of my childhood, my mom finally had a cell phone, and it was like a Nokia cell phone. Of course, not a smartphone. Smartphones came out when I was in high school. I think the iPhone came out just before I went to college, or while I was in college. And so, that everything started going really digital and screen heavy at that point. But I had a very analog childhood, and I look back and think that was amazing. And that's what I'm trying to give my kids that now. So of course my kids don't have cell phones. I'm not going to permit that. We don't watch movies frequently. But that was an amazing childhood. And me and all my peers grew up that way, outside, playing around, having arguments, getting along, learning to actually live together in a society. And it was great. And I look at that, and I think all of my peers look at that, and then they look at their children now and think, oh yeah, I had it better. And so I think there is this future, even absent, genuine religious faith that offers a positive alternative. There's a future in which people say, no, we had it better before. Let's go back to that at least. It doesn't mean we're going to go back to the horse and buggy, and I don't think that's possible, obviously, but I think we can go back a little bit.
Yeah, I think there is a vision there for what you know, not rejecting every technology that, and, the beneficial parts of it that we've had over the last, 100 years, but yeah, having a thoughtful discussion about, well, what does a good life look like, and how can technology support in that? And I'd be curious to hear. I mean, how have you found, like, going back to that idea of like holding back the flood of these technologies? How have you found that side of things, like trying to keep smartphones, trying to keep these technologies out of the life of your family, like in your community? Has that been difficult?
Yeah, I mean, we are privileged in the sense that we can survive on a single income. So I'm the income earner. My wife is the educator, so we homeschool our kids, and so our economic position allows for that. And so in that sense, it's been very easy because we do all the education. We don't send our kids to public school. They're not issued screens or iPads or Chromebooks there, so we control all that. We've had a very strict rule in our family that the kids will not have a screen. So none of our kids have a tablet or a phone. Our oldest is 11, and I do not plan on changing this rule until, honestly, I don't really see a reason for any of my kids to have a smartphone while they're in my home. So I don't see us changing that rule until my kids are out from under my roof. And so I think that's been pretty easy. Their friends, their peers, Some of them, we have some like-minded families in our community who basically say the same thing: no screens, no devices. We have others in our community who have like already issued their kids smartphones at the age of 11, which is a crazy choice. But um, yeah, I think for us in our situation, it's been pretty easy. However, our situation is very different from the parents, both of whom need to work, or single moms who need to send their kids to public school because they don't have an option, and then that child is just, they feel like they need to have a phone so they can get in touch with the parent when they're not there, and then the school is also issuing these digital devices and having them do online homework and all of that. So we have it pretty easy in that
Mm,
sense. I think for other people in different situations, it's a much tougher tidal wave to hold off.
mm.
And then I think the problem is, like, I don't know how you put that genie back in the bottle, right? Like once it's there, it's very difficult to unwind. I'm mixing metaphors here, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is part of the idea, like the myth of the machine, as Mumford explains, is this idea of, I mean, it feels in one sense like, yes, it's the technology's here, it's inevitable. Like, how can you hold it back? But I mean, again, you just described a way in which you are holding it back in your life, and you know, I can imagine ways in which we could, again, like even at the community level or potentially at a societal level, introduce structures like that, which are much more, what I think like what you described sounds to me like the kind of way I would like to raise my children. It sounds like the way that most people I know would like to be able to raise their children. Um, and yeah, it feels like it's an impossible thing, or it feels like the opposite of this is inevitable. But again, like there are kind of living, breathing examples of how it's not inevitable.
We didn't really talk about this exactly. We touched on it a little bit, but this whole question about religious faith and where can these sort of alternatives come up. And you mentioned kind of the community coalescing around these ideas. Do you think that Mumford would say there is a secular alternative to the myth of the machine, in the sense that, like, maybe you could say secular humanism could be something that could stand in the way? I think most progressives, like technological progressives, I don't mean political progressives, although they are often the same. Although not always, as I've noticed, like Bernie Sanders and AOC, for example, they're the ones
Mm,
coming out strongest against these data centers. And I will also say, like, your point about like organized labor and labor unions. I mean, the AI apocalypse, if it doesn't happen, what's leading us toward that is making me more more sympathetic to ideas of labor on the left than I ever have been. I've generally been like certainly anti public sector unions, and in general, I've thought unions do more harm than good. But as I've watched these like sort of techno optimist leaders who have aligned themselves with the American right, people like Mark Andreessen or Elon Musk, whatever,
mm,
just forge ahead with no regard for human dignity. I'm now seeing like, okay, maybe these labor unions are really onto something. Maybe there's a path here. Now, whether or not I have confidence in like the AFL-CIO to actually like take the reins and do that is a different question. But there's a function that's needed there to protect the dignity of workers. But anyway, I digress. My question is really like, is there a secular humanism that can compete with the myth of the machine, or is it really just these, I guess, like these communitarian ideas, and that's the only resistance we have, short of actual religious alternatives?
mm.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I don't know if I have a very good answer. Like I say, like when I've like looked around at the um yeah, I mean even these kind of community level alternatives, it tends to be these faith communities.
Yeah.
I mean I could imagine uh a community of people who are organized around like a shared commitment to like secular humanism, or something like that, like building the same kind of community, defining the same relationship. But yeah, when I look around, it tends to be, or the best examples of this I've seen are um, faith communities. And I mean, I understand as well. I mean, you mentioned homeschooling in the US, which I think is like much more common in the US and
Very
than
much
it
so. Yeah.
is, yeah, in Europe. And that seems like I mean, several of my friends were homeschooled here, and it seems like a way in which you can just much better. yeah, define the terms by which your family, or even like if you said you'd like-minded families, like that you kind of collectively define your own relationship to these things. And um, yeah, I mean that's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been my observation here that the families, and it's not a coincidence, obviously, but the families with whom we have the most in common on these shared visions of what we want our children's lives to be and how we want to teach them and who we want them to become, we have the most overlap with families that share our religious values. You know, that we know through church or
Mm,
otherwise. I think when families don't have those, it's a lot harder to have those points of overlap. Now, it's hard to disentangle. Is that because of the shared religious convictions, or is it because of the ways in which those religious convictions shape shape our secondary desires, for example, or
mm,
the lack of them? Yeah, I guess I'm not being super clear. I don't think. Let me try this explanation again. It's not necessarily because, so we're Catholic. Um, it's not necessarily because we and this family think it's important to go to mass on Sundays, or we think that the incarnation really did happen, that we all of a sudden think kids shouldn't have phones. It's rather because of the follow on beliefs from those core principles of our faith that allow us to emphasize, okay, family is really important. Because family is
mm,
important, our family time is important, so we're not going to have devices at the table. Education is important. Education is not just about getting an income. Education is about making a better person and growing in virtue. Work is important, not because work is a means of making money and acquiring material things, but work is important because you are a person with dignity. And so when we teach you to work, we're going to teach you to work this way, and we're going to teach you the value of work in this way. So we have those convictions. I think it's harder to have all of those convictions if you don't have a religious faith. It's not to say that someone who's not religious, it's not to say that atheists can't value family, of course, but I think the roots will be not as deep, let's say.
mm. Yeah, I mean, I think this is. I mean, I'm thinking of like text something like Charles Murray's Coming Apart, or like these
Yeah,
other
yeah.
people who like document this decline in wider community ties alongside this decline in religious faith, or like religious observance, say. And yeah, I mean, it's there's certainly some seems to be something kind of like symbiotic between the I don't know, like the like the having of a strong like faith-based community, and having a strong community, having like
A social
a
fabric.
strong
Yeah,
base. Yes, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and I'm just having like a basis for valuing things like family and these like very traditional like ideas of this is what makes a good human life outside of a religious framework, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, some of our closest friends here, and friends that our children play with all the time here, are LDS, Latter Day Saint
Mm,
believers, and we obviously have substantial differences uh, in theological beliefs with them, but we share many of the core principles that I just mentioned about the value of family, the value of work, etc. And the same would be true if we had Orthodox Jewish neighbors. The same would be true if we had Muslim neighbors. And so there is some hope that I have that with that groups of faithful people like that can find common ground and share more of these principles and strengthen the social fabric in that way. But I also wonder if we're too far gone. And you had a line in your article where you said something like, let me see if I can find it. Yeah. Here we go. Technological doom is not something that lies ahead of us. It has already arrived. The demise of humanity is an ongoing process by which we allow ourselves to be colonized by machine values, a gradual disempowerment that is happening all around us. AI should be seen not as a race to a promised land, but as a journey ever farther away from human flourishing. And I read that, I highlighted it. I should tell you that a couple weeks ago, I started this essay and didn't finish it, but the title of the essay was going to be "Dystopia is Already Here," and
mm,
the idea was I think what you're getting at here, which is that we are afraid. The AI doomers are afraid of dystopia. They're afraid of either cataclysmic civilization destroying some sort of event, or they're afraid of like us sliding eventually into a dystopia, surveillance state, whatever. And my point was dystopia is already here
Mm.
because every single one of us is addicted to the Black Mirror in our pockets. We can't function without it. We don't know how to talk to each other. Many of us have social anxiety about even going out in public anymore because we don't experience and interact with people. For many white collar workers, our entire lives are spent staring at a screen. You and I are staring at a screen right now. We're talking to each other, but like we're not actually incarnate
Yeah.
in person together. And so like this is dystopian. It doesn't mean that we're all dying, but this is dystopian. This is not how the world is supposed to be. And so I tend to agree with you that technological doom is already happening. And so I guess I'd love to hear you elaborate on that a little bit more. But then my follow-on question is: Are we too late? Like all these things can happen. Is it all going to be too little, too late? Did we miss the mark here by 25 or 30 years for us to say, whoa, hold on, too far?
Yeah, I think the idea of thinking about technological doom or dystopia as something that's already arriving, I think as you mentioned the doomers, like this idea that there's this apocalyptic endpoint we're moving towards, this like robot apocalypse or whatever it is. It's a future event, no matter what it is. And this is a very kind of disempowering framing because we always think of this doom as something coming, and so we depend on like the engineers or the AI safety people to tell us when we should start panicking, when we need to act.
Right.
But by reframing this as something that's already arrived, it makes, I mean, now is the time to act. Now is the time to panic. And yeah, seeing this not as a problem of the future, but really as a problem of the present. And I think there's like two ways in which I would like, or maybe two ways to like give specificity to this idea. So one is this kind of mechanization of the person that takes place.
Mm.
So um, we might be like you and I are probably like very disturbed by the idea of having like a chatbot or someone having a chatbot as a friend or as even a romantic partner. The idea
It makes my
that
skin crawl. It's so
yes,
awful.
yeah, or even the idea that someone wouldn't be able to formulate an original thought for an essay or that
Yeah.
but I think the risk is that these things which seem to us so like deeply disturbing could just become normal for the next generation. Like
Mm.
it won't even be a matter of it'll be seen as like anachronistic or uh, you know uh, just they won't get what the problem with this is. And I think that is the kind of trajectory that we're on at the moment with the with our kind of like a tacit acceptance of whatever new product gets pushed out by these companies. Is that it's not a big bang extinction event, but a gradual normalization of inhumanity that crowds out what we would take to be our distinctive human qualities. And the second way I would just like kind of cash out this like doom already arriving is in terms of there's a really quite scary but also great paper that came out I think last year called Gradual Disempowerment, where the authors kind of describe this process of technological doom where, again, it isn't a big bang future event,
Hmm.
but gradually over time, humans just give up control of more and more of our decision making over more and more segments of society to these machine systems that we just don't ourselves understand. And once that happens, it becomes virtually impossible to take back control. And we can like speculate on where this might lead us eventually, but certainly I think it ends in a very strange and inhuman world. Um, so yeah, I think the advantage of trying to think about this doom is already here is really to try and have a more a frame that gives people more agency. It's not that we're waiting for this thing to that might happen or not, but it's happening around us, and we need to act now. And to your question about whether it's too late, like should this have been acted on 25 years ago? I mean, I don't know, I think like that's not a form of thinking that I could give, or like
It's not helpful.
it's not helpful,
Yeah.
and
It's fair.
it's yeah. In my more pessimistic moments, maybe I would have sympathy with it, but it's I mean it's why I guess you're doing this podcast. It's why I'm
Right.
kind of trying to do the work I'm doing is because I do think that there is, yeah, we aren't
Yeah.
doomed.
Totally makes sense. I mean, I think it is interesting to hear some of these techno optimists talk about the future that they want.
Mm,
It's Brian Johnson who wants to live forever. It's Elon Musk who wants to colonize Mars. It's Mark Andreessen, who's clearly a techno-optimist and just believes, ever upward is the answer. And the world that they create, or the world that they paint a picture of, I think is just not a world that is particularly compelling to me. Like I
Mm,
don't want a humanoid robot to cook all my food for me because, well, one, I think my wife's a great cook and would probably always do it better than a humanoid anyway. But like when I cook my own food, I like cooking my own food,
mm,
and then I like sitting down to eat the food that I have cooked with my own hands, and there is a satisfaction in that. I don't particularly love mowing the lawn, but I'm not going to buy a robot to mow the lawn for me either because after I mow the lawn, I like looking at the lawn and thinking I mowed that, and now it looks good. And my lawn doesn't look that good, but it's a little overrun with dandelions this year because I haven't sprayed like all the I don't want to spray all the toxic cancer causing carcinogenic chemicals on it.
mm,
But my point is like I want to do the work and then look at it and think I did that because you cannot replace that satisfaction. I think it's telling that in the Christian and obviously the Jewish tradition, humanity begins in a garden,
mm.
and like the epitome of flourishing and communion with God is minding the garden, like living in the garden and minding the garden, and that is what Adam and Eve do in the creation myth. We want to move to this world where there is no garden, like we have just factory farming and we have factory fuel, Soylent Green if you want to go all the way there to the sci-fi world, but like it's not a world of human flourishing that anyone prior to the sci-fi writers of like the 1970s would recognize as human. It really bears no commonalities with that. I mean, even, like you read Brave New World, for example, like
Mm.
the removal of procreation from the marital act is held up as the ideal there because then you make the marital act all about pleasure, and it's obviously no longer marital; it's just an act. But like none of that would be recognized as a human thing prior to, as I said, the science fiction writers of the 20th century. But now it's become more and more mainstream, and I just don't find it all that compelling. I mean, even if it's not, it does, a lot of it makes my skin crawl. The idea of colonizing Mars is pretty cool. I'm a space nerd, so I don't know if you can see it. Maybe it's not in the frame, but the Artemis space launch system is behind me, the
Mm.
Lego model of it. I like that. Going to Mars is cool. I love, I'm an Apollo nerd, but most of the vision is just not that compelling to me. Like, give me an internal combustion engine instead of an electric car. Much more interesting and much more fun to drive. Give me a stick shift instead of paddle shifters. Like, I don't really want all this stuff that you guys are trying to foist on me.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you mentioned, just as a side note, you mentioned Soylent Green as a
Yeah.
science fiction thing. Are you familiar with this Huel?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I spent some time for my PhD research in San Francisco last year, and they were all drinking Huel. And like, if they would say it's, nutritionally complete, it gives you everything you need. But I'm like, like, it seems like such an alien way of thinking about your relationship to your body, to your,
Absolutely.
like you've already turned yourself into a machine.
Yes. It's fuel. I mean, it literally,
Yeah,
that's why they called it fuel because
yeah.
it's fuel. Yeah.
Um, And then, yeah, on this sort of like vision of the future that they're offering. I mean, I included a quote in the article from that Eric Schmidt had said at an event I was attending. So Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of
Hmm.
Google. I don't know if this was scripted or it was just off the cuff, but he was talking about sort of the challenge and promise of AI, and he said we need to pass through the eye of the needle without killing ourselves in order to get to this promised land of AI. And first, I thought it was just such an interesting and strange biblical passage for him to invoke. I think it's from the Gospel of Matthew. It's easier for a camel to pass through the eye
Yeah.
of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. And for this kind of mega billionaire funder of this technology to use this, not to say that worldly wealth is insufficient to enter the kingdom of God, but rather that only by funneling more money into AI research we can reach this
It's,
promised land.
it's
It's
wild. It's wild.
But I think it gets to this kind of the secular faith point and
Yeah.
what is this promised land that they think we're moving towards? I mean, it's not anything like the kingdom of God in the Christian sense. But I mean, it's some people there's this phrase like luxury automated communism. So, oh yeah, a world where we won't have to do any work and humanoid robots are doing everything for us, or a world where we upload our consciousness into the cloud and I don't know, or in a just general sense, like a kind of transhumanist future where we
Yeah.
um, go beyond the confines of our body. And there are like people who believe all of these things, but yeah, like I don't think it's a compelling vision of the future either. I don't think most people do. I don't think like
Right.
if
That's my
they
point.
like,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, I think most
um,
people agree with us and say that's not now, do they want to do less manual labor on balance for sure? And do they appreciate when things are easy? And is it nice when Claude can put your schedule together for you, et cetera? Yeah. But I think um, on balance, when you ask them, do you want this thing replaced? Most people would say no. I think one of the risks is that the way AI is entering into our lives is incremental.
mm,
And like maybe you first tried ChatGPT 3 years ago when it came out and thought like that's fun, that's kind of quirky, like I made a poem to send to my friends or whatever, and now you're using it more and more and more, and the more you rely on it, the more it becomes easier to say no to. So if you don't draw the lines in the sand now, I think it becomes harder. Even if you know the type of world that you want to live in, the type of human you want to be, it becomes difficult to not have this shifting sand under your feet where you're relying more and more and more on it.
yeah. Yeah, and I think, I mean, it goes back as well to what you were saying about the data centers. That, like, I think what the idea that there is this kind of from above idea of this is what the good life should be for you, this is what your environment should be, this is the type of community that you should,
Yeah.
without having any kind of say in this, or um, yeah, I mean, it's just it's deeply undemocratic. It's deeply,
Hmm.
it seems to just go against everything that I don't know, Western civilization has always been built on, stood for. Yeah, and
It does feel very Chinese to me in the way that the Chinese Communist Party has fused quite successfully by prosperity metrics. They've fused capitalist notions of private property ownership and private business ownership with central planning,
mm,
and they have done exactly what you're talking about, which is drive progress forward at all costs without regard for human dignity and value and inherent worth, and told you how you will live. And the experiment, like I said, by some measures, by GDP growth, and by GDP growth and by like total prosperity per capita, et cetera, they've been successful at that. But in one of my favorite shows, I'll include a link in the show notes if I remember, is called The China Show, and it's by a couple of guys who speak Chinese, one Brit, one American, and they've traveled extensively throughout China, and they update what's going on in China all the time. And the populace in China is not happy overall. I mean, very low levels of happiness. They have pretty high levels of psychosis. They have these events every week or two where I forget what they call them, like societal retribution event or something like that, where people will just drive their vehicles into a crowd of people and commit mass slaughter because they just lose it. So China is not an example of a functioning, healthy society, but we seem to have taken a lot of our cues from how they have done their technocratic development, and we're trying to do the same thing here. And it's alarming to me. It's not good. I have one more question for you, Connor, and that's that in the article you talked about a sort of secular corollary to theodicy. Theodicy being
mm,
basically how Christian theology wrestles with the problem of evil. And there are a variety of answers to this problem. I mean, probably the most comprehensive is the biblical book of Job, but it is often, to put like a tight gloss on one of the most common answers to theodicy and the problem of evil is that um, God is doing things behind the scene that you cannot understand, and you are not God. So so you should not question God. Who are you to question God when you were not there when He laid the foundations of the earth? Which is to paraphrase what God tells Job in the Bible. And so you say that the myth of the machine, or this theology of the machine, offers a secular corollary because it answers you and me who are complaining about all these negative externalities from technological development. And it basically says, look, you are not the machine. The machine knows what it's
mm.
doing. The machine will get us to the promised land. You just have to trust the process, etc. Do I have that right?
Yeah, and I think it's the, I mean, it even goes to, so you use the term externality there. I mean, the idea that the negative effects are externalities, that there's the normal functioning of the technology, which is that it's beneficial, it extends our lives and makes things better. And then when things go wrong, it's because of the human incompetence, human evil. Um, we were very happy to say that penicillin saved millions of lives, but we don't say that the invention of the train created Auschwitz. That,
Yeah,
the even though you couldn't have had something as like the Holocaust on the scale that we had it without the 20th century transport and logistics technology,
that's such an
we say
interesting
no.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like human evil. That's not the technology.
Oh wow.
Um, and I think this is like really clear in the AI case, where so much of the discussion takes place in terms of misuse risks. So the the normal use of AI technology is good, and what we need to address is misuse, whether this is someone using it to build a biological weapon, or even in the like very tragic case of uh, the Rains case, the teenager who
Yeah.
yeah, there is this sort of narrative that, well, like this is a example of a misuse of the technology, that we need to stop people from using it in this destructive way, rather than just saying, the technology itself. It becomes kind of impossible to say the technology itself is evil, or um I shouldn't, like, demonic or something, if you want to
Yeah.
use a
Yeah.
religious register. It's just, well, like either the technology is good or the technology is useful. It's just a tool, and people are just using it in the wrong ways. And so, yeah, the negative outcome always becomes the fault of the human. The positive outcome becomes the result of the technology, and that's where I sort of saw the. I mean, I suppose I was thinking of kind of the more the kind of like free will.
Moral evil. Yeah, yeah. No, because I think
Yeah,
I think it
yeah.
works. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that, but so I think it actually works in both lenses. On the one hand, the Christian theodicy says, yeah, God is good, humans make moral choices, and so moral evils in the world, like the Holocaust, are the result of humans making their choices, not of God. And then it also looks at natural evils, hurricanes that kill people, etc. And that's when it says this is happening because sin entered the world. The world is fundamentally broken,
Mm,
but this is not a reflection of the all holy and all good God. I think the corollary that you're talking about works both ways. One, because AI is good, technology is good.
mm,
Humans are the bad ones. The humans are the ones who mess it up. They're the ones who introduce bugs in the machine, or they're the ones who make choices to exercise it poorly. But then I think it also works on the natural evil corollary too. Like AI technology is good. Will there be side effects? Will there be
mm.
casualties of the inexorable march? Will there be displacements of people from their ancestral homelands because we have to build our data centers? Well, yes, there will, but that's just how it goes. That's how it has to go because we're going to the promised land. Yeah, so I think it does work in both frames. That's very interesting. I guess this opens up a final question. I thought that was my final question, but I guess the final question is: Are we building this future of a machine god? Do you think? Not in the sense that we're actually building God. I don't
Mm.
I don't believe that's metaphysically possible. Do you think we're building to a future where people will worship a machine god?
I mean, I think part of what Mumford is saying with the myth of the machine is that, I mean, even before we have AI, is that we are kind of already there.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah,
going back to this like point about the decline of religious faith, I mean, the the myth of the machine kind of acts as a stand-in for it. It's like, even if there
yeah,
isn't a God, even if there isn't a kingdom of heaven, my life, my children's life are still going to be getting better because of this technology. And maybe you could see at the end, like, just as there's the promise of eternal life in Christianity, there is some kind of like promise of eternal life that eventually we're going to like solve aging, solve death through the technology. So, yeah, I think in ways, yeah, we're already there. Um, I think like maybe take like a more like literal reading of the question of like worshiping the machine god. I mean, I don't know if you've been following any of the like very disturbing stories about like AI psychosis and the ways in
hmm
which individuals have come to enter into, like uh see some kind of deity or presence behind the chatbots that they're talking to, and then they come to have this like extremely warped and disturbing idea of something that you could
yeah,
analogize to a god inside the machine. So
yeah.
I would see that, yeah, quite possibly being more widespread in the future, and that's, yeah, it's a very horrific
It is.
prospect.
Yeah, it's this is Brave New World, isn't it? We're in it.
Yeah, like yeah.
As you said, technological doom is here. We've got to fight back against it. Conor, it was really a pleasure to have you on. I'm really grateful that that you wrote this article that I could find, and then that I had the thought of just reaching out to you blind. Thanks for reading an email from someone you did not know at all and agreeing to come on the show. It was really a pleasure to learn from you. And I'd love to have you back on anytime. So thanks for all the work that you do, and I'm looking forward to reading your work in years to come.
Thanks, Zach. Really enjoyed being here, and really looking forward to following your project.
Sounds great. Well, to you who are listening, thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to follow Conor, Conor, are you on Twitter or social media or anything where people can follow you? Have a Substack, anything like that?
I am planning on launching a Substack just to kind of collect my
Great.
writings from various places. I've been writing some stuff from Compact Magazine recently, including this article. So yeah, I guess that's the best place to find me at the
Great.
moment.
Okay, so I will include links to not only this article, but some other Compact stuff that Conor has written. And then, Conor, if you let me know when you start a Substack, I will go back to the show notes and I will update them retroactively. So if you're listening to this in the future, you may see a link to a Substack in the show notes there. So thank you so much for listening. Until next time, God bless you.